We are recording.
Welcome to today's AIM Center webinar. We're in part 4 of our quality indicator webinar series. There are a couple of materials that you can download from our website that go along with the webinar, one being today's PowerPoint. The other is a digital handout that has associated resources from our guests. The link is bit.ly. It's bit.ly/QI4 page. The letters are all uppercase. Closed captioning is being provided. If you do not automatically see the captions on your screen, click on the closed caption button in your Zoom controls, and you should see the captions appear along the bottom of your Zoom window. And if you have any problems, please go ahead and check with Leslie in the chat. She can help you out. I know a lot of people just prefer to see the captions during a webinar. Also want to thank Bobby, our caption provider today, for being here, for your service. We also want to make sure that everybody has the opportunity to contribute to today's webinar. We do mute everybody's audio. So although we can't hear you, we really want to make sure that we can't listen to you, but we want to hear you. So please use the chat. You open the chat panel from the Zoom controls. If you don't automatically see that, make sure that you choose all panelists and attendees from the blue drop-down menu so that everybody benefits from your comments. And if you're a tweeter, please use our handle, which is #AEM, AEM for all. So moving on to the content for today, which is part 4 of our quality indicator webinar series. Today we're talking about data. I'm really glad that we have people here who are as excited about data as we are. We know that data is a 4-letter word for a lot of reasons, but we also know the power of data and how helpful it can be. So the quality indicators from the AIM Center have some critical components related specifically to both data use and both data collection and data use. And we have some help today to learn more about how those quality indicators around data can be implemented in the field and used for good. And by good, I mean to improve student learning, improve student outcomes. As an overview, I know with the description of this webinar series, we make the recommendation before the webinar to go to our website and check out the quality indicators ahead of time. We're trying to use sort of a flip model here rather than just describe and do a didactic lesson on the quality indicators. We would like you to do that part by going to our website, reading about the quality indicator and its critical components, looking at the associated resources, then come to the webinar and hear from some of our AIM experts who have tried out some of the quality indicator components in the field and to learn from them. But we also know that not everybody has a chance to do that ahead of the webinar. So here's just a little bit of background before we bring in our guests. There are 7 quality indicators, with each of them having critical components. We have covered the first 4 in the previous 3 webinars. Here we're looking at both the quality indicators 5 and 6, so systemic data collection and the use of those data to guide changes. Our final webinar in this series is coming up on April 2nd, and that's going to cover quality indicator 7, allocation of resources. So the objectives for today, specifically looking at data, is that you'll be able to explain in your own words, not our words, because the quality indicators aren't all that friendly. We know that the language of the quality indicators, the language of accessibility can be really technical. So one of our goals with this webinar series is to help put those words into context and make them more familiar. So we want to make sure that you're able to explain the quality indicators in your own words. Of course, learn from the experiences and the practices that other states have used in order to improve their data collection and their data use, and then obviously know where to go to build background knowledge further and to collect resources that you can bring back to your schools, to your settings. As I mentioned, I think when I started, I'm Cynthia Curry. I'm director of the National Center on Accessible Educational Materials. I'm here with 2 co-presenters, Kay Ratzlaff of Florida, and Daniel McNulty of Indiana. And I'm going to let both Kay and Daniel introduce themselves when they get to their parts within the presentation. First, just a little bit of a background about these two quality indicators. Quality indicator 5 is about data use. It's really important to note that within the quality indicators, data collection, it's really important within the quality indicators to recognize that we separated those two, that you got to collect the data first, that has to be strategic, and then you use the data for analysis. So quality indicator 5 is that the agency develops and implements a systemic data collection process to monitor and evaluate the equitable, timely provision of appropriate, high-quality, accessible materials and technologies. So some key words there: systemic or systematic. So systematic meaning that there is a logical, methodical plan for the data collection, monitored and evaluated over time. Equitable meaning we want to make sure that the data collection is free of bias, that we're getting information that gives us a clear, valid, reliable understanding of, are all students who need AIM receiving them? That we are not having some students who have a certain disability category receiving their materials and formats that they need more frequently than students with other disabilities. We want to make sure it's timely, meaning at the same time as other students receive their materials, and we want to make sure we want to monitor for high quality. Under each of the quality indicators, there's also an intent statement. So the quality indicator statement is sort of a high level, what is the quality indicator? The intent gets a little bit more under the hood of that statement. The quality indicator 5 intent is that data are collected that measure the degree to which accessible materials and technologies provide all learners with disabilities the opportunity to acquire the same information, engage in the same interactions, and benefit from the same services as learners without disabilities with substantially equivalent ease of use. Those terms, or that phrase, is in bold because it comes from the U.S. Department of Education, U.S. Department of Justice joint letter from 2010. It was the accessible or inaccessible e-reader, dear colleague letter, where they set out the definition for what accessibility means, and it really has that connotation of making sure that it is the substantially equivalent ease of use, equally effective, equally integrated. So essentially making sure that students with disabilities have the same learning experience, same learning opportunity. That definition really does set a clear bar for what accessibility means. Some of the sample components under quality indicator 5, so this is getting at those, the critical components that help you identify what are the parts that are going to indicate that you've met the quality indicator, that you have strategies for collecting data. Collecting data on timely manner, the number of students who are served, the disability categories to be tracking to make sure that there's not a higher frequency of a certain disability over others. What are the sources of the materials? Is it coming from Bookshare, Learning Ally? Is it coming from the Instructional Resource Center at the state level? And collecting some feedback from students, from families, others who benefit or are at risk of not benefiting from accessible materials. Compliance, of course, collecting data around copyright and accessibility compliance. Collecting data around the learning opportunities and professional development that's offered. I know Daniel's going to be speaking a lot about the way Indiana, the Patents Project, collects data on their learning opportunities for teachers in their state. And then also to have a plan for collecting and maintaining the data. So what are the methods? Is there a data management system that's going to be used? And that's something that Kay is going to help us with, because Florida has a pretty robust data management system, and she's going to introduce us to how that works. And of course, to have timelines for the data collection so that you can monitor progress over time. Quality indicator 6 is that the agency uses the data collected to guide changes that support continuous improvement in all aspects of the systemic provision. There's the word I was looking for, systemic. So systematic data collection, systemic provision and use of accessible materials and technologies. The intent of quality indicator 6 is that data are systematically analyzed to gauge effectiveness of all aspects of the current system and are used to inform actions needed to improve future practice, program planning, and resource allocation. So the key to the intent behind Quality Indicator 6 is that the analysis has a purpose, that it's forward thinking about diagnosing where is the system working, where is it breaking down, and how does that help inform our future practice, how does it inform our program planning, and where do we need to either put more resources, or how do we need to redistribute or reallocate where those resources currently exist. Some of the simple components that bring this indicator to light is that to meet Quality Indicator 6, the data analysis, is that there's a plan for the analysis and for the use of the data. So what's the purpose? So it needs to be clear why the data are being collected. With whom are the data going to be shared? What are the strategies for quantitative analysis versus qualitative analysis? How is student identity going to be protected? What are the timelines for review? And how are data-driven decisions going to be implemented? There needs to be some cross-referencing strategies in the analysis of the data. So is there an impact on student independence? Are students, they have more opportunities to participate? Is there evidence that students are progressing at a higher rate than they were before a plan was put into place and data were being used to drive decisions? What are the disability categories that are being served to make sure that that's balanced? What are the student demographics of the students who are receiving AIM? And again, I know Kay is going to show us the way they do this in Florida. And then, of course, you know that you're meeting Quality Indicator 6 when data use improves future practice, program planning, and resource allocation. Really a key. So I know that I was just doing a lot of talking to get to kind of front load those quality indicators 5 and 6 so that you know what Kay and Daniel are going to be referring to and how they use those quality indicators, you can see how these quality indicators come to life. But before I move over to them, I wanted to just give you a chance to think about those two quality indicators, especially if you did some homework before you came, and to what extent are those reflected in your current system? So you may be in a school district, you may be in a virtual high school, you may be in higher ed. So this webinar series focuses on the use of the quality indicators in K-12, but we do have the critical components for higher ed as well. There's a lot of relevance for higher ed in the quality indicators. So just on a gut reaction, have you not started, or where in your setting have the quality indicators or some of these pieces, have they not started to show? Are they there somewhat in existence, or are you really cooking with quality indicators 5 and 6 and doing a lot with data in your setting? So Jane says somewhat. Moving along. Oh, I have to change my words. I like moving along better than not started, somewhat, and really cooking. We could probably somewhat moving along. Great. Going to ask at the end of the webinar what, after hearing from Kay and Daniel, who have they're going to be talking about two very different uses and analysis of data. I'll ask you at the end, how will you take this information? What will be your first step? So having a little bit of a self-reflection going into Kay and Daniel's presentations will just give a little bit of help to activate some of your thinking about how you might use this information. Great, and please continue to use the chat to ask questions. Think aloud. We love it when people think aloud in the chat. So if something comes to mind, we're here, we're watching. And one last note is that across all of these webinars in our 5-part webinar series on the quality indicators, the terms AEM and AIM are being used interchangeably. And I just like to reinforce in each of the webinars that we're talking about the same thing. There's a reason why you sometimes see AEM and sometimes you see AIM. AIM is accessible instructional materials. The E in AEM is educational. But for the purposes of this webinar, when we say AIM, we mean any instructional material, whether it be print, whether it be digital, audio, braille. We're talking about the same thing, making sure that whatever students are using for learning is in a format that's accessible to them, that they have technology with features that they can use for progress, participation, and independence. So just wanted to make that clear. If you see one or the other, we're talking the same thing, interchangeable. So I'm going to hand this over to Kay, who's going to talk about data collection and use in the Instructional Materials Center for the Visually Impaired in Florida. Thanks, Kay.
Thanks. I'm still muted. Am I muted? I can't unmute.
You sound great. We can hear you.
Okay, great. Okay, I
Yeah.
saw my little line through it. There we go. I see the green going now.
You're good to go.
Good. Hello, everyone, and welcome to us from sunny Florida. It's just so you know, it's about 80 here today. I'll probably put the top down on the way home tonight, but enough about that.
Moving on, Kay. Data.
Remember? Like to rub it in a little bit. Rub it in a little bit.
You're here to talk about data. I'm in
data.
Maine, so that's why I'm
oh gosh, yes. Oh my gosh. So the thing, and as Cynthia was talking, and I just kind of had this thing going through my head. I feel like we have so much data that sometimes it's hard to parse it out and to figure out exactly what we need to do with it. I don't know if everyone is like that. So I'm going to hit a little bit on data systems and what the use that we have here in Florida, our use of data, and then a little bit about security, because I think that's always one of the things that everyone is concerned about and interested is how we're doing with our security. So I'll go ahead and let you the next slide. So just a little bit about us. Yes, we are the Florida Instructional Materials Center for the Visually Impaired, FIMC-VI. Our responsibilities for AIM, obviously we have for 40 years, 45 years, been for students with visual impairments. And then as NIMUS and AIM and all of this started rolling in, we opened our umbrella a little larger to take on some of the responsibilities for students with print disabilities. So our main thing still is our textbooks for students with visual impairments, and then we coordinate with Bookshare and Learning Ally and the other things for more of the digital access to digital textbooks for students with print disabilities. But our I would say 80% of our focus is still on textbooks for students with visual impairments. We also are responsible for the district digital rights managers, and their responsibility then at the district level is for students with print disabilities. And then we also coordinate with several of the other Florida Department of Education projects, we have what we call Florida Diagnostics and Learning Resource System, which is Fiddlers. If you were on one of the other ones, David Davis is from that. And they're all disabilities. Then we also have the Florida Inclusion Network. We work with the Deaf Blind Project. So we look at AIM, AIM, and AEM across all of those platforms. So right now we have about 3,000 students that are visually impaired in Florida. We only have about 200 or 300 that are registered with us for print disabilities, because they don't have to register with us. They can go to Bookshare and qualify for Bookshare on their own. So we do get some data back from Bookshare about usage in Florida, and we collaborate with them on that. For those 3,000 students, we have had about 3,000 orders for accessible instructional materials, Braille, large print, and some digital. And what we're seeing, and I'm sure some of you all are seeing this as well, we're seeing a major decline in those orders for hard copy accessible materials. Especially, there's been a dramatic drop in large print, and we think that is due to the accessibility of digital text and tablets, and laptops, which is wonderful. I said, this is the only place we want to work ourselves out of a job, is if we didn't have to do this. That's quite all right. So we celebrate the fact that those large print orders are going down. People are using devices, they're using low vision devices, and they're using disabilities, they're using digital text more. So, so that's kind of what we do. We operate as a grant project under the Florida Department of Education. Okay, Cynthia. So here are some of our data systems. The first big one that we have is we have I said it is like, it goes from order entry to where that book is delivered to tracking it along every step of the process. We know when it leaves the transcriber. We know, let's talk about a Braille book. So we know when that, so it runs our center, okay? From inventory to production to delivery, all of those materials are in this one big database. In that, we also can provide online annual registration of the students with visual impairments. And those of you that are working in that world, you know we have the APH annual census, so that's all done online. That information all goes into that database. We have online ordering and all the accessible textbooks. Again, that all goes in there. And this is one of the things that we really like about this system, is that it allows us to track those textbooks from order to delivery to inventory and every step in between. So I just pulled up our statistics. So from July of 2018, because we go on the fiscal year, then about 58% of our books have shipped within 30 days. So even if we get that, we can only close it out at the end of 30 days. So if we get an order in on, say, August 30, no, not August 30, say August 20th, and it goes out September 1st, well, that doesn't count within the first 30 days. So you see what I'm saying? So it's not from that's the only downside to it. But within that same month, 58% of our books have shipped. Within 60 days, 87% of our books have shipped. And within 90 days, then 91% of our books. And then we've always got that one or two that something's happened, we're having to wait on a transcriber or something, but typically most of our books are, the vast majority are out within 60 days from the date of order. And do we want to improve on that? Absolutely, and then we'll talk about that a little bit in a little bit. So with that system, then they can also generate these monthly reports. And then I also, sometimes I ask for weekly reports. I'm like, okay, where are we? They've got a couple books that we're hanging up out there, and I want to know where we are with those. So we're looking at that. And obviously we can do quarterly and then annually reports as well. So it really lets me keep my finger on the pulse of where things are in the system. So that's our bread and butter. That's our big Mama Jama. That's the one that we go to for most of our stuff. Then we also have, outside of that, we do, because we are a grant-based project, then we have to report all of this information to the Department of Education. So a lot of that is, we do an online services survey, like it goes out to about 2,000 people. Anybody that's you know, asked to be on our newsletters, that has come to a workshop, that has attended any of our Braille Challenge events, any of those things, and they're in our mailing list. From that, we usually get back, because it's the teachers, we usually get back about 40 to 50% of the teachers will reply back to the services survey. And that's where we ask all of those questions. You know, were your Braille books appropriate? Were they delivered in a timely manner? Were your large print books? How was the training? Did you use our loan library? Blah, 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 all the things that we do here. But we're really looking at that, you know, how they were with our services. So that gives us a lot of data. That's where we also ask a lot of questions. What can we do to improve? What would help here? What do you need here? So we get a lot of information back from that. We also have an online ordering and tracking for APH materials and for our loan library. And that's just kind of a SharePoint forms thing that dumps into an Excel spreadsheet, and we can look at that to see. I just had a request from the Department of Education. they sent us a list of districts and they said, have you done anything for pre-K support for these districts? Well, I was able to go to that APH thing, pull it up, and look to see who had ordered pre-K materials that was on that list, and sent them back a thing and said, yes, you know, we've provided about, it was close to $5,000 worth of materials for students, pre-K students in these districts. So it was an easy, quick thing, and it gave me a really good way to do that. We also do a lot with, we have a strong program called Quality Programs for Students with Visual Impairment. Some of you may know of that, QPVI. And that's where we go in, we have trainers, we have QPVI facilitators that go into the districts, and we teach them how to set up their own data system, which we call the master list. And then, so I can then go back to any of those districts that we have taught how to do this and say, hey, can you send me the latest copy, the latest download of your master list? And I can look at that as far as the number of students. I can compare their number on their master list with our number that's registered and say, wait a minute, you've got 40 kids on your caseload here that aren't registered. Why not? And we can tweeze some of those things out. So I have access to that data if I need it. And then we also have all of the quarterly and annual reports that we have to gather together from all this information and send to the Florida Department of Education. So it's a, you know, it's kind of a two-way street there, that a lot of this gets reported back. I think our baseline data section last year for our grant section was like 35 pages long. So it's an extensive review of what all we have done. Okay, Cynthia. So then I'm just thinking really like, you know, we've got data. Yes, we do. We've got data. How about you? It's like we've got so much data. So from the Florida Department of Education then, and we've just been meeting with them to say some of these reports aren't coming as easily as we would like for them to. So they're working with us on this. But they changed systems up there, and some of our reports fell off and we're low incidence. We get that. But we do get from them, we get student enrollment numbers per district by primary disability, which we consider unduplicated, and then also any of those with secondary disability. So if a student is IND and visually impaired, then they would be considered duplicated. They have more than one disability. They're going to show up on both lists. So then we have student achievement data. So those are the statewide assessments. We have Florida Standards Assessment, we have end of course exams, and then we have Florida Standards Alternate Assessment. And we now can get that as that, just the grades, you can't really tie it to individual students, but we can say, you know, like third grade visually impaired, and then what they're, but we can get it by district. We can also get placement data, and that goes back to that because we're for least restrictive environment, and are they, you know, what are they in resource rooms, self-contained room, or are they in general ed? And then we get the number of teachers certified by district, and then student exit data, and that's been an interesting one to really be able to take all of that information. So we've got this, you know, this wealth of information of all this stuff that we're trying to take. Now, so what do we do with it? Okay, so Cynthia, the next one, please. So some of it we look at demographics, and we look for shifting, you know, if all of a sudden we see an explosion of a certain eye condition, or a higher increase like we've seen this year of maybe students with convergence insufficiency versus just some of our others. So we're looking at those demographics. We're looking at where our students are. We're looking at the districts as far as the population of that district, and then are they over or under identifying students with visual impairments or with learning disabilities, and how can we help them? And are they, for the number of students that they have, are they ordering the appropriate materials? You know, if they're saying, if we're looking at their data and they have 40 what we would consider Braille reading students, and then we go look and they've only ordered 4 or 5 textbooks, we're going to say, whoa, what's the disconnect here? So we're making sure that, and it may be that they, that they have Braillists, or they have that these are, all user refreshable Braille displays or something, and that's fine. But we do ask those questions, so we correlate that to the textbooks and the materials and APH orders, and who's sometimes over ordering. It's like, wait a minute, you only have 3 kids on your caseload. Why do you need 8 Braille writers? So, right, this doesn't make sense. So we look at that from both angles, and are they does it line up? And then when we can take those achievement scores by district, and also looking at that to say, wow, this district's really struggling, their kids are really low. Well, guess what? They haven't ordered hardly any textbooks or any materials, so they're not getting the AIM that they should be getting. And how can we go in and provide technical assistance and help them with that? So that's another thing that we look at as well. And the use of data. So yeah, let's be honest. I mean, accountability is a big thing, a really big thing. And so looking at those so statistics, what we call our SHIP statistics, that's hard to say. So looking at that, if we have 1 book that's hanging out there, or 2 books that's hanging out there, and they're both the same transcriber, or they're both the same vendor, then we may not use them again. So, but we don't know that unless we have that data to be able to go in and look and say, okay, what is the problem with that? So we do use that for accountability for our transcribers and our vendors. We also use it for in-house production. We have our own in-house production. How long has that book been in Braille or on the waiting to ship list? Why is that book still sitting on the waiting to ship list? Why hasn't it gone out? And you can't do that without data. And one of the things I realized when I came from the classroom, from being an itinerant teacher to FIMC, is even the teachers, when I tell the teachers, no, 87.4% of the books are shipped within 60 days. And they're like, well, yeah, you're right. It was just that geography book that took so long. I said, I had the 6 other books I ordered, but yet if you ask them without the data, they're like, oh, I can't ever get my books on time, because they only remember the one that they don't get. So having that data for them to be able to reflect back on that has been very, very powerful for us. So that has really been, that's been important. That also then is all reported to DOE quarterly and annually, that we do what we call a project tracking system. And so we have to go in each quarter to say how many books we shipped, how many books were ordered, what the timely delivery was. And so that's all reported. So that's another way that we show what we're doing and how we're doing it. We also use it because we do a lot of professional development. And if we're looking at this and we're seeing this discrepancy, then we say, wow, we need to address how to get math textbooks ordered in time, because those are the ones that take the longest. And how do we, so we may do a webinar or something on that again, or go in and work with a district one-on-one. And we can also honestly look, and we've started projecting and predicting future textbook orders and materials purchases. So if we're looking at this and we say, wow, 4th grade has just exploded and 6 of our districts are using this same series, and let's go ahead and order some 5th grade. And so we get the transcribers ready on those before, so that they're in our inventory and they're ready to go. So we're able to speed up that availability and not wait until they until the order actually comes in. We are projecting and going ahead and doing some pre-ordering. And we share all of this with our stakeholders. So that all is always that we're using that data, and we're making sure that we're holding ourselves accountable, as well as using it to drive our services. We call it data-driven decision-making. We love it. Okay, security. So these are like, oh, it's online. Oh, it can't be secure. Yes, it can. So every year in January, the directors of exceptional student education, they're sent a username and password for them to go into the FIMC database, and for them then to authorize what staff they want to go into and be able to have access to that information. Some districts authorize every teacher of the visually impaired, every district digital rights manager, secretaries, whatever. Okay, that's their choice. They can do that. Some districts order one person and one maybe digital rights manager. That's okay too. That's their responsibility to decide how they want to do that, because they can only see their district's data and their district, their students. So, but once that person is authorized, then they can register students and order materials at any time of the year. So the district rights managers, digital rights managers, they're also authorized. And Florida, we set it up that there's 7 allowed per district. And so they do it that way. And then everything is auto backed up in cloud security, but we really kind of pushed the security off onto the districts. We made them responsible for who they let in and who they don't. So that way it's their responsibility. Okay, Cynthia. So come teach with us in Florida, and that beautiful beach chair and that beautiful beach can all be yours. Here, I even had my, I had my come visit with us. We're so much fun. So seriously, we do need teachers. We need teachers badly. Assistive tech, teachers of the visually impaired, we would be welcome to any of you. There's plenty of openings. I see my staff is on the chat box. Yay. So if you have any questions or you have any anything that you need from us, give us a call. We'd love to visit with you.
Kay, thank you so much for that. I have actually I've had the backstage tour of the FIMC, and I have to say, I think you know what kids in your database had for lunch.
Yes.
You know so much about these kids. And I'm wondering, just a follow-up, I don't see, please be entering your comments, questions in the chat. I'm not seeing anything there right now. I just wanted to go back to the data you collected around student achievement. How are those data used? And it didn't appear explicitly in the how you use the data, but I'm wondering if there's a way that TVIs tap into that, if classroom teachers tap into that. And I know it's it's aggregated, so you're not identifying by student their achievement, but if there's a way, that's something that we're trying to really drill down on at the AIM Center, is access to accessible materials for students who need them, is it making a difference to their learning? Intuitively, you would say yes, because there's now access where there once wasn't.
Right.
But there are some interesting questions that we have to answer.
And there are, and this is one of the things that we've had. It was funny because if there's less than 10 students in a grade in a district, then that data was what they call asterisked out. I mean, you couldn't even get to it, and we had to convince them that no, it's okay to give it to us. We're part of you. We don't want their names. We don't want any of that. But so we have had that discussion with DOE, and they have begun to see that. So the districts all get the full reports with all of their individual data, and the teachers can go there and can see what their individual students are doing. And that's one of the big things that we've tried to do with the QPVI, is we also want to look to say, are those are they being provided quality instruction as well as quality materials? Are they getting the materials they need? And is that also showing up in their achievement scores? And so we look at it a lot of times. We take that data from the Department of Ed and we correlate it to the districts that we have done QPVI and said, are we seeing any achievement, any growth in achievement? Now they switched data systems, so we had 2 or 3 years that we couldn't get it, so that kind of interrupted so we're back to baseline data right now. So I will let you know as we move forward with that, but that's absolutely one of the things that we're trying to. It's hard to connect those dots. I mean, there's so many variables, and I understand there's so many variables, but even like just our districts with QPVI, we have access. I can ask them to send me their data, and it's about 1,000 students from just those districts that we've worked with. So out of 3,000 students, that's a pretty good sample size.
Yeah.
So it gives us some statistical validity to look at this and try to tweeze it out some. We can even like separate braille readers versus large print, who's assistive tech, pre-readers, all of those kinds of things. So it's a lot of it's for us to help us drive our services and plan our professional development and our technical assistance.
Great. Thank you so much.
Okay.
So Kay's going to stay with us. So if you have questions, just go ahead and enter them in the chat. We may have a little bit of time at the end as well. I've got a Q&A for both Kay and Daniel, but we're going to move over to Daniel. Daniel is returning. He was here for the last webinar in the series talking about Patton's Aiming for Achievement grant, which is a professional development year-long. If you missed that webinar, please go back and watch it, because not only does Patton and Daniel spend a lot of time designing and delivering that professional development, but they collect data on it to measure its impact. So Daniel's back to talk about the impact that is evident as a result of the data collection they do around aiming for achievement.
All right, thanks, Cynthia. Yeah, I'm Daniel McNulty, and I'm the State Director of the Patents Project here in Indiana. And unfortunately, it is not a sunny 80 degrees here as it is for Kay, but we'll take, I think it's 47. We'll take the 47. It's not so bad. Just real quick about Patents Project. We are a project in the state of Indiana that covers all the K-12 schools in the whole state. So we've got staff that have offices around the whole state. And basically what we do is assistive technology, universal design for learning, and accessible educational materials. So it's kind of all of those things under one roof, which is really nice in some ways. It's also a really big job in some other ways. We're a staff of 17 people, including myself, trying to do that work. And really what we do is everything wraps around the concept of increasing access to the curriculum for all students in all schools. So a part of what the Patents Project does is the Indiana Center for Accessible Materials, or the ICAM. And the purpose of that was really to address the IDEA reauthorization of 2004. And the ICAM opened up in Indiana in October of 2006. And through that process, well, part of the data systems that I'm going to talk about is very similar to what Kay talked about in Florida. And that piece is through our ICAM, which I'm going to talk about first here. And these are the 6 things that relate to what the ICAM does and the data collection that happens there. So we have a similar student registration and a DRM, or a digital rights manager registration process that Kay is working with in Florida. So we have that data, which includes student-specific data and disability areas, qualification for various specialized formats. And that's all a web-based ordering system through our patents website. So the DRM is appointed by their superintendent, logs into our website after some training, and is able to enter students and request specialized formats of books. So the ICAM provides Braille, we provide large print, but we also provide digital audio and digital text. And the ICAM works pretty hard, like Kay does in Florida, to maintain the integrity of copyright of those materials. And we do it in a fairly similar way. We ensure the copyright of those materials in our system, and then we ask our users, our digital rights managers, who are the only people who can request files at this point, to sign a user agreement, basically stating that they're going to maintain the copyright of those files as well once received. So they request them, we find them, package them, send them out in a locked format, and that DRM unlocks that format, and by doing so, accepts responsibility for the copyright of those materials. And we do a lot of conversion of file formats at the ICAM too. So they'll maybe withdraw a NIMAS file set from the National Center, the NIMAC, and convert that into something else. Let's say an accessible EPUB or an accessible PDF. And then we'll send that out, because of course the NIMAS files themselves are not student ready as they come from the NIMAC. So they do a lot of conversion, and they do a lot of technical assistance and support as well. So a DRM may contact us and say, hey, I need a specialized format, but I really don't know what I need. And we'll talk to them about what kind of format might be best, or maybe it's multiple formats. And you can go ahead, Cynthia. And this data at the ICAM is all primarily requested through the requests that we receive from our LEAs in Indiana for these specialized formats. So we've got about 5,000 titles, unique titles in our ICAM library right now. And those are all derived from NIMUS file sets. So we've got some other files that are derived from other various areas, but we've got about 5,000 NIMUS file sets that we've already converted into other formats, and about 4,350 Braille books that are ready to be sent out. So we get information about student registrations and student demographics and the DRM and the corporation. Each corporation's permitted to have up to 5 DRMs, and we encourage them to have 5 DRMs. And as those requests are placed by LEAs, we get a feel for, and we collect data on what types of books are going out, what types of materials are going out, how many Braille books are we sending out versus how many EPUBs or accessible PDFs. And we've filled from July until now, because we work on that fiscal year as well from July 1st. So from July through February, we've sent out 3,170 specialized formats. And that doesn't include Braille. So those are just the accessible NIMUS formats in other formats. So audio or EPUB or PDF or something like that. And the ICAM staff also provides quite a bit of technical assistance, as I mentioned. So how to use these files, what to do with them when you get them, maybe what format do I need, that sort of thing. And we've responded to almost 1,500 specific unique requests for technical assistance since July as well. Go ahead, Cynthia. And then Cynthia mentioned our Aiming for Achievement grant, which is where we collect a different kind of data. And so this is more on the side of implementation type of data. So the acquisition data was what I just talked about, and then the implementation data is equally important, but maybe a little more difficult to collect. And so we've really tried hard to do it this year in a more structured and systematic way, I'd say. And we've learned some pretty interesting things, which I'll talk about here, and I think we can improve that for next year, definitely. But basically, this is an application process. I can go back to that one just for a second, Cynthia. So basically, our Aiming for Achievement grant is an application process, and we select about 8 school districts a year to work with, and we do work with them intensively for the whole school year. So they come for a day of orientation in the early part of the school year. They're assigned 2 patent specialists to work with that district for the rest of the school year. They do an in-depth needs assessment on their district, which is based on the 7 AIM quality indicators. And then they develop an action plan for their district based on that needs assessment on the 7 AIM indicators. And then they have weekly meetings with my staff. So they'll meet with the patent specialist once a week or so, and then they'll come back together. Everybody comes back together online for a collaboration in January. And then they continue meeting with the patent staff for the rest of the school year until the end of May, and they come back to Indianapolis in person, where it's kind of a show and tell day. And they'll share their data, they'll share the success stories, the case studies they've done, and the kind of the whole process. So they'll do a 20-minute presentation that kind of details where they started, what their needs assessment looked like, what their action plan looks like, their triumphs and their struggles along the way, and their data. Okay, so now you can go ahead, Cynthia. So that's how the AIM grant works. And so this year, we've always encouraged them strongly to collect data in the past with the AIM indicator that goes along with that. So they build, again, their action plan based on those 7 AIM indicators. But what we found was some did a pretty good job, some did an okay job. A lot of districts really didn't collect that data. And so this year we required it. And we created a simple Google form that we asked them to submit data to us on their AIM project once a month. And these are the things that we ask. So we ask for the month, the district name, and their email address. And then we ask for the percentage of students that are on diploma track in that particular month. And so ideally, I know this is going to probably take time, For districts that are just beginning with AIM, it's probably we're not going to see a whole lot of change in that percentage right away. But ideally, we'd like to see that percentage of students on diploma track going up. And we also request data on the time away from instruction or time out of class. And so that could be time out of class for behavioral reasons, for being called down to the counselor, having to go to the nurse, being pulled out for OT therapy or speech therapy, whatever it is, but time being pulled out of instructional time is significant. And it's something I believe really strongly in addressing. And so we asked for that this year, and I'll talk about how that turned out, or how it's turning out in a little bit here. We asked for the number of active DRMs that they have in their district this month, and so ideally we should see that going up until it hits 5 and then hopefully remains at 5. We asked for the number of students identified with a print disability this month. That's probably something we want to see going up as well, because we know there's students in almost all districts who have some sort of print disability that's not been identified. And we asked if they have a written district-wide policy regarding AIM this month. And then we finally asked for anecdotal evidence. So we asked for at least one example of how the AIM project and the work that they're doing has impacted at least one student or a group of students in that particular month. You can go ahead, Cynthia. So here's some of that data. So they really started collecting that for us in September. So this is September through February. And as far as the percentage of students on diploma track, we've had 5 out of, so we had 1 team drop out. We started with 8, 1 team dropped out. So out of our 7 teams this year, 5 of those have shown an increase just in these past 6 months, which is pretty cool. And some of that increase is just like 1%. Sometimes it's 2%. In one district, it was quite significant. But 1% of a large district is still a lot of kids who weren't on diploma track that are now. So that's a huge success in my opinion. And then the time away or out of class minutes is something that's been really difficult to collect, kind of to my surprise. Most districts, I would say, didn't really have a good grasp on how to collect that data when we first started this year. And they've started to wrap their heads around that. And a couple of easy ways they've started to do is by collecting suspensions, expulsions, in-school suspensions, number of referrals. And so if we put an average number of minutes, like on a referral, if a referral is sent to the office or whatever, and we say that average is 15 minutes, we can sort of start to get an estimate of the number of minutes that students are out of class. So at this point, I would say that that data is inconclusive. It's proven to be really difficult for schools to collect. But on a positive note, it's really pointed out an area that I think needs to be addressed. And obviously, if we want students to be making academic progress, we need them in class. One particular school did let me know that, in an average 9-week period, students were being called out of class 128 times. And that was a whole class period. And that's one class. That's like one classroom. That's a lot of time out of class. And another school let me know that they have some preliminary data to suggest that if a student is missing, is being pulled out of class 1 day a week, that student is much less likely to pass the end of course assessment, which is also pretty important data. But that's something we really want to focus on going forward. But it's also something that's proven pretty difficult for districts to collect up to this point. As far as the number of active DRMs in each district for each particular month, all of our 7 teams this year have increased those. Most of them have 5 and have maintained that for the last couple of months. The number of students identified with a print disability, all 7 teams have increased that as well, but that's mostly happened over the past 2 to 3 months, which sort of makes sense. So over the first 2 to 3 months, 4 months maybe, they're learning about the process, they're starting their awareness in the rest of the district, and they're starting to build in some of the more implementation types of their pieces of their action plan. And one of those is to hopefully identify more students who can benefit from specialized formats. And so all of those have shown an increase in that, but mostly, again, over the past 2 to 3 months, which is pretty cool, because once we identify those students with a print disability, we can identify what formats they need and get those formats to them, and hopefully increase the other numbers as well. And then the written district-wide policy. So I'm pretty big on this as well. I think it's very important to have a policy that states this is important. And I think it's important to have a policy district-wide, just on file. I think it's also important to have it in teacher evaluations if schools are doing those. And I think it's important to have in the hiring process. So in job descriptions, I think this is an important piece to have in there as well. And so I at this point, I just require them to have a written district-wide policy on file in the district office and on their website. And so none of our seven districts had those on file when we started this process. They all do now except for one, and they're still working on it. And I think it's because it has to go through their board and get approved, and it's been a slow process. And then the anecdotal evidence. So I've got a few of those to share. We've got a ton of them. And when all these districts come back to us in May for their show and tell day, it's my favorite day of the year. And I joke and I say that it's the day of the year that I cry every year. And Joy Zavala jokes, and she says, if you can make Daniel cry, you're either doing something really right or really wrong. But it's a great day. It's my favorite day of the year. And so we've got a ton of those types of stories, but I've got a few of those on the next couple slides here. And I'll try to wrap it up so we have some time for questions as well. So these are a couple quotes that have just come in the past 6 months. So starting the process of creating a written policy regarding AIM for district. This will impact for years to come, not just this group of students, but generations, hopefully. And that was really great for me to read, because that's the exact intent of having a written policy. Because we've seen over and over where there's 1 or 2 or 3 people in a district who kind of take care of all these things for the students who need them. And then they leave and they go somewhere else, or they retire. And then that district's kind of starting at level 1 again, or level 0. So that's a really important piece. It has prompted us to write and complete a written policy regarding accessible educational materials, which impacts all of our students. We have an increase in AT, or assistive technology evaluations, due to the AIM grant. So that's really great to read as well. It was very beneficial for a 3rd grader who is struggling as he is on his final stretch to prepare for iRead 3, which is our statewide 3rd grade reading assessment. One student asked to speak to the school board to talk about how text-to-speech has helped her, and to thank me for writing this grant to bring it to our district. That's pretty cool, and that's actually on YouTube, and I'll try to send Cynthia the link to that, and she can share that out as well. An internal website is under development to provide teachers with information about UDL and to prepare for rolling out UDL on a larger scale. So even though this grant this year was really focused on AIM, you can see that the UDL factor and the AT factor are really closely related, as most of us probably realize. And so it's a good way to work on that as well. And we're going to really make UDL an integral part of this grant for next year as well. One student reported that they have been able to write their writing assignments more easily and with less stress. This has been a huge success because she often would refuse to do written assignment work. So accessible material, this was important to me as well, because for accessible materials, many people often refer to just reading, but it of course closely relates to writing. And as a student myself from kindergarten through 8th grade, I struggled to write mostly because I hated the sound of pencil on paper. And so if somebody would have said, hey, you can write with a keyboard, or you can write with a pen even, they would have gotten a lot more writing out of me. Okay, Cynthia. So I've got just a couple success stories, and I'll try to go through these pretty quickly, but the first one I want to talk about is Kaylee, and she's the one pictured there with her teacher. She started the process with a Lexile of 0, and she was given materials that were accessible to her and a screen reader, and for about 6 months. And then at the end of those 6 months, we talked to her and said, hey, we really don't like to take accommodations away that are working, but we're really just curious because you're doing so well. And she was like, yeah, that's cool. So we did, and we tested her again without the accommodations, and her Lexile jumped to 271. And this was really important to me because it's a clear example of specialized formats and text-to-speech not impeding the process of reading, but actually while she was having access to her materials during the 6 months period, she was actually learning to read as well. And she's just one example, but it's a really cool example. One other one I want to talk about here is Emily. She was in junior high, and she was in AP classes. She was very introverted, possibly on the autism spectrum, struggling with vocabulary in an AP government class. And she would shut down and not do the work and become overwhelmed. And she went from being an A student to a D student really quickly. And it's individual words, vocabulary, terminology type things were getting in the way of her overall comprehension, and they were effectively blocking growth and learning for her. So with accessible materials and a specialized format and text-to-speech, it not only voiced the text for her, but it could also simplify some of the text on demand, which allowed her to not become overwhelmed and frustrated and shut down. And she could relate it back to her prior knowledge and build vocabulary in the meantime. And so she, a long story short, she went back to being an A student, which was pretty cool. And we've got another student, Matthew, who is a sixth grader. Matthew experienced great feelings of success after intervention with text-to-speech and word prediction. And his reading score increased by 23 points from a level 5 to an early level 6 on the iReady diagnostic test in just 2 months, bringing him into grade level. So this was a student that they were talking about taking off of diploma track and putting into a life skills classroom. And in 2 months, he's back into grade level. So those are just a couple stories, and you can go ahead, Cynthia, because I know we're running out of time here. But this is kind of what we're looking at going forward. Collecting more data from our AIM teams on their graduation rate. And these will all, I think, align really closely to the results-driven accountability that our Department of Education is looking at as well. We're looking at state testing results reports, least restrictive environment percentages, alternate assessment participation, and dropout rates of students with IEPs, as well as looking at individual student growth in somewhat of a more quantifiable way. So I think that's it, and I didn't leave any time for questions, but I'm happy to stick around as long as anybody else is here asking questions.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Daniel. You know, I have not been able to be present during the final presentations of your Aiming for Achievement teams. I've been at the beginning, but I've never had the benefit of being at the end. And I always love hearing, even when you're just talking about it. You know, it's when you don't work directly with students anymore, it's always so lovely just to hear those stories that you're able to share from working with those teams. So thank you so much for what you do and for bringing that over to us, so it helps inform and keeps us inspired. There was a question, and I shared the question. It came from Kathy Lulk of the policies that you require the districts to have on file, the accessibility policies. Is there a way that you can share those out? I know some of them are on their website, so of course, I guess it would be a matter of just getting the links to them, or another way that I think they would be great examples for the progress monitoring tool content. We could certainly drop them as a resource there as well.
Yeah, I'll just make sure with each of the districts that they don't have a problem sharing with those. The ones that are on the website obviously are open to the public, but a lot of them will have a slightly different version or a more in-depth version of it that's on their that's in their office.
Okay, great.
I can make sure I have permission to share those, and I would anticipate that I do, and I can get those to you, Cynthia.
Okay, great. And I'm sure it'll be interesting to compare them. You know, I think it's just be a great exercise. And the more that we have to work from, people can identify, oh, that I recognize that particular guidance because it relates to my district as well, or my district doesn't have that particular tool. So we wouldn't include that, but just a way to open people's eyes to ways that they could embed accessibility based on models that are already out there. So thank you so much. The tool that I was referring to when I was asking Daniel if we could have those examples, the accessibility policies, because we're developing an AIM progress monitoring tool at the AIM Center. So we're going to be it's actually this slide. We're talking about it's going to be the access solution, the track accessibility, the accessible. We're not quite sure, but it's going to be released this summer. And it will be a way that districts or schools can track their implementation of the quality indicators over time. So having something like the examples of accessibility policies that Patents has their districts create and have on file would be something that we could include under quality indicator 3, which is written guidelines. So be on the lookout for that this summer. We're certainly going to be sending it out on a big splash when that tool is available. And as promised, at the end of the webinar, I know we're a few minutes over, but hopefully as you're exiting, you are thinking about ways that you can take this information and implement it in your own setting. What are some of the data points that are important to you, important to your district, as you are implementing, making changes in the accessibility of materials for students? What is it that you want to capture to make sure that it's having an impact, and you can monitor that over time. Next webinar, the final in the series, is on Tuesday, April 2nd, next Tuesday. It's on allocating resources, same time, 3 p.m. Eastern. So if you haven't registered, there's still plenty of time to do that. My contact information is in the slide deck, and it's also in the digital handout. Recall that the digital handout has additional resources from Kay and Daniel. And if you would please complete the survey, our webinar survey, which I am sure Leslie has dropped in the chat, maybe not yet, but just about to, there it is. If you would go ahead and please complete the evaluation for today's webinar, we'd greatly appreciate it. Thank you, Kay. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Leslie. Thank you, Bobby, our caption provider. And thanks, everyone, for coming today. Let us know in the evaluation, as we're winding down the quality indicator series, what additional supports would be helpful to you as you're thinking about the quality indicators in your setting and how to implement them. So thank you. Have a great rest of your day.
Okay, we're good.
Thanks. See ya.
Thanks.